It began as a perfect summer afternoon. The sky above Ramstein Air Base was clear, the air warm, and more than 300,000 people had gathered for a day of excitement. Families stood shoulder to shoulder. Children pointed up at the sky, and the sound of jet engines echoed across the runway as some of the world's finest pilots prepared to perform. The highlight of the day was still to come, a manoeuvre known as the pierced heart, a display of precision, timing and absolute trust between 10 aircraft moving as one. It was something they had performed countless times before, but on the 28th of August 1988, something was just slightly off, and in the space of 7 seconds that perfect summer afternoon would turn into one of the deadliest airshow disasters in history. On that day, Ramstein Air Base, in what was then West Germany, was hosting Flugtag 88, an open day and air show organised by the United States Air Force. Events like this had been held for decades, offering a chance for American service personnel and local German communities to come together. For many, it was a rare opportunity to see military aircraft up close, to watch aerial displays that combined skill, discipline and spectacle. The weather was ideal. The atmosphere was relaxed and expectant. Around the base were static displays of aircraft from across the world, while food stands and attractions added to the sense of a summer event. For families, it was simply a day out. But for many in the crowd, the real reason they had come was to watch one of the most famous aerobatic teams in the world, the Frecce Tricolori of the Italian Air Force. Formed in 1961 as Italy's national aerobatic team, they had built a reputation for precision flying on a scale few others could match. Their displays were instantly recognisable, not only for the tight formations, but for the trails of green, white and red smoke that followed them through the sky, mirroring the colours of the Italian flag. Only highly experienced pilots were selected for the team, many with thousands of flight hours. Even so, it was a role that carried inherent risk. Formation flying at high speed and low altitude left very little margin for error. On that afternoon, they were flying 10 Air Macchi MB339 jets, each assigned a call sign from Pony 1 to Pony 10. Their performance built steadily, manoeuvre by manoeuvre, each one executed with the precision the crowd had come to expect. The aircraft climbed, rolled and turned in close formation, the sound of their engines rising and falling in unison. As the display progressed, the anticipation grew. Everything was leading to the finale, the pierced heart. The manoeuvre required exact timing. The 10 aircraft would split into 3 elements. 5 would peel away in one direction, 4 in the other, before curving back towards each other to form the outline of a heart in the sky. At the moment those two groups crossed at low level, the 10th aircraft would descend alone, passing through the centre like an arrow. From the ground it would appear effortless, but in reality it demanded absolute precision. At around 3:40 p.m. the team took to the air and began setting up for the final sequence. As the manoeuvre unfolded, everything initially appeared as it should. The two groups separated cleanly and began their turn back towards one another. Above them, the solo aircraft, Pony 10, climbed in preparation for its descent. That aircraft was being flown by Lieutenant Colonel Ivo Nutarelli, a highly experienced pilot who had performed this manoeuvre many times before. But this time the geometry was not quite right. Nutarelli climbed slightly higher than planned. As he rolled over and began his descent, the aircraft accelerated more than intended. He was now coming in too fast, and as the formation below tightened, crossing at little more than 150 feet above the ground, at speeds approaching 350 miles per hour, he was also too low. There were attempts to correct it. The air brake appears to have been deployed, and there are indications that further measures may have been taken to reduce speed, but there simply was not enough time. At approximately 3:44 p.m, the two heart-forming groups crossed in front of the crowd, just as they had practiced countless times before. But Pony 10 did not pass safely through the centre above them. Instead, it entered the formation at their level. In an instant, the display became a disaster. Pony 10 first struck Pony 2, flown by Captain Giorgio Alessio. The impact was catastrophic, killing him instantly. The aircraft then continued forward and collided with Pony 1, piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Mario Naldini, the leader of the team. The rear of his aircraft and part of the left wing were torn apart. 3 aircraft had now been critically damaged in a fraction of a second. Naldini attempted to eject, but he was far too low. His parachute did not have time to deploy before he struck the runway. Pony 2 also crashed seconds later, while the wreckage of Pony 1 hit the ground after striking a medical evacuation helicopter positioned on the airfield, severely injuring its pilot. That pilot would later die from his injuries. And then there was Pony 10. Engulfed in flames and no longer under control, the aircraft continued forward, and it was heading directly towards the crowd. From the perspective of those watching, the shift was almost incomprehensible. One moment they were watching a display, the next a burning aircraft was coming towards them at speed. Some parents would later say they had only just lifted their children onto their shoulders when the aircraft came down. Pony 10 struck the ground just short of the spectators and exploded. Around 300 gallons of fuel ignited instantly, creating a fireball that sent burning fuel and debris outwards in all directions. That fuel did not simply burn where it landed. It spread outwards in a fine mist that ignited instantly, clinging to clothing, skin, and anything it touched. The wreckage cartwheeled forward, destroying a police vehicle and carrying flames into the densely packed crowd, before finally crashing into a refrigerated ice cream trailer. Those closest to the impact were struck by debris, fragments of aircraft, sections of fencing, and pieces of metal moving at high speed. Others were hit by the force of the blast, but for many the greatest danger came from fire. The entire sequence from collision to impact took about 7 seconds. 7 seconds in which there was almost no chance to escape. Survivors would later describe a sudden wall of heat, the smell of jet fuel and smoke, and thick fumes that made it difficult to see or breathe. Within seconds, confusion turned to panic, the air filled with screams, shouted warnings, and the roar of flames. People tried to help one another, pulling others away from the fire, tearing at burning clothing, searching for loved ones who had been beside them moments earlier. But the speed and violence of the crash left many with no chance at all. One witness would later say it felt as though the sky itself had fallen. In total, 70 people lost their lives, including the 3 pilots. 67 were spectators. More than 500 others were injured, many suffering severe burns and life-changing injuries. In the immediate aftermath, emergency crews from the base arrived within minutes, but it quickly became clear that the scale of the disaster was overwhelming. There were hundreds of casualties spread across the area, many critically injured. German emergency services were called in, but delays occurred as some vehicles were initially held at the base entrance due to security protocols. And as responders from both nations converged on the scene, differences in procedure began to create further complications. The US approach prioritized rapid evacuation, moving casualties as quickly as possible to hospitals. The German approach focused on triage and stabilization at the scene. In the chaos, these two systems clashed. Victims were carried away on wooden planks, loaded into helicopters, trucks, and vehicles not designed for medical transport. Some were taken without receiving initial treatment. Others were transported without clear coordination, placing additional strain on hospitals that had little warning of the scale of the incident. It was not possible to find anyone in charge, one emergency responder later said. Communication problems made the situation worse. Language barriers slowed coordination. Telephone systems became overloaded. In some cases, even medical equipment between American and German teams was incompatible, delaying treatment. At nearby hospitals, doctors described severely burned patients arriving with little or no prior treatment. In some cases, critically injured people had been transported long distances without medical supervision. In the hours and days that followed, more lives were lost, many due to the severity of their burns. The investigation that followed was detailed and exhaustive, drawing on video footage, flight data and eyewitness accounts to reconstruct what had happened in those final moments. The conclusion was that the disaster began with a misjudgment during the final manoeuvre. Nuttarelli had entered the descent too high, too fast, and ultimately too low as he approached the crossing point, leaving no margin for recovery. In a display that relied on precise timing and positioning, even a small deviation had placed his aircraft fatally out of alignment with the formation. One of the surviving pilots would later recall that the formation had appeared normal until the final seconds, with no clear indication that anything was wrong. There were other theories in the aftermath, including the possibility of a technical failure or malfunction, but no evidence was found to support them. The aircraft showed no indication of mechanical fault before the collision, and the official conclusion remained that the accident was the result of pilot error during an exceptionally demanding manoeuvre. However, the investigation also highlighted deeper systemic issues. The crowd had been positioned unusually close to the display line, and the manoeuvre itself was designed in a way that brought aircraft towards the spectators at low altitude. In ideal conditions, this created a dramatic visual effect, but it also meant that there was very little room for error. When that error occurred, there were no safeguards in place to prevent the aircraft from entering the crowd area. What might otherwise have been a mid-air collision became a mass casualty disaster. In the aftermath, the impact of the disaster was felt across the aviation world. Germany suspended large-scale air shows, and when they resumed, new safety regulations were introduced. Aircraft were no longer permitted to perform manoeuvres towards crowds. Greater separation distances became mandatory, and planning began to account not just for ideal conditions, but for what might happen if something went wrong. The Frecce Tricolori also made changes to their routines, reducing the risk associated with manoeuvres involving a solo aircraft intersecting a formation. In the years that followed, the disaster left a lasting mark not just on aviation, but on the community around Ramstein. Today, memorials stand both outside the base and within it, marking the place where lives were lost and ensuring that those who died are not forgotten. And perhaps that is what defines the Ramstein disaster most clearly. Not just the sequence of events or the technical causes, but the human reality behind it. Families had come for a day out with their children, watching the sky as pilots performed a routine they believed they had mastered. All of it changed in just 7 seconds. This was a reminder that even the smallest miscalculation in the wrong moment can have irreversible consequences, and that behind every disaster there are lives, stories and memories that deserved to be remembered with care. Now, I have a great interest in aviation, and this was a terrible disaster that I remember vividly. Our condolences go out to the families of those who lost their lives, and our best wishes to go out to all those who were injured. Despite the nature of the information, I hope you appreciated the way it was presented. I'll see you on the next one, and I'll wish you bye-bye for now.